I'm sure that we could agree that the song The 12 Days of Christmas is probably one of the more obnoxious Christmas songs written. But what are the 12 Days of Christmas? Well, in today's video, that's exactly what we're going to explore. I'm Enygma, and if you've been enjoying the content so far, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and that little bell to be notified when any new videos are released, as well as joining us on the other social media platforms to continue the conversation. Yuletide is a festival that's generally celebrated historically by the German peoples. But where did the origins come from? In fact, some of them are even linked back to the wild hunt, the god Odin, and the pagan Anglo-Saxon Mondranit. So join me today as we discuss Yuletide. Stay a while and listen. Yule comes from an Old Norse Yule and Old English Gihol, which was a season of hunting after the harvest was done. This fell in line with what we now call December, so eventually it became associated with the Christmas holiday. The first recorded use of Yuletide was around 1475. However, we know that these festivals and celebrations were long celebrated prior. The Yuletide season lasted from November to the beginning weeks of January. But the Feast of Yule lasted 3 days over the winter solstice and marked the beginning of the new year. Yule was similar to Passover in Jerusalem before the temple was destroyed. For Passover, the Jewish people would bring lambs, birds, and other animals to sacrifice. The blood would be offered on the altar and the meat cooked for the Passover meal. According to a Norse historian and saga translator, Lee M. Hollander, every 9 years, Germanic or Norse farmers were compelled to come to the Temple of Hoth and make sacrifices and feasts over a prescribed period of time during the Yuletide. Yule was celebrated by Germanic countries with animal sacrifices, where the sanctified blood was then used to paint the altar, temple posts, and the supplicant himself as part of the ritual. He was literally washed in blood. Gross. This was followed by feasts, storytelling, and drinking around a large communal fire. In Grettis' saga, Yule is described as the greatest mirth and joy among men. This was also a time of oath-making. Business deals and marriages were brokered. The Godai, or the priests, judges, or chieftains, who were in charge of the Hof, wore a great gold ring around his neck. The people would swear an oath and lay their hands on this ring and make a pledge in front of the witnesses. Such a ring was actually found in an excavation of an 11th century chieftain's residence on the outskirts in Denmark. In the Saga of Hakon the Good, Hakon I of Norway changed the date of Yule from the days surrounding midwinter to the date that Christmas was observed in the rest of Europe. Though the sacrifices and religious practices of Yule were abandoned, many Yuletide customs still continued. The Yule log, for example. Eventually, many Yule customs were absorbed into Christmas celebrations as Christianity overtook Northern Europe. The oldest tradition was of the Yule log, which echoed with sacrificial significance. Originally, it was a whole tree or a large tree trunk that was carefully chosen, felled, and hauled to the log house with a great ceremony. Then the end of the trunk was laid on the hearth and was lit with a brand from the previous year's Yule fire as the rest of the trees stuck out of the hearth into the room. The tree trunk was pushed into the hearth as it burned, and did so continually for 12 days, from Christmas Eve to Epiphany. At the end, the unburnt part of the tree was extinguished and saved to start next year's fire. In Holland, they believe that the storing of the leftovers of the Yule log under a bed would protect their home from lightning strikes, no doubt a nod to Thor. A French tradition celebrates a Yule log in the form of a fancy dessert of thin sheets of sponge cake, spread with buttercream frosting and then rolled into the form of a log. Chocolate frosting, bark, candy, holly leaves, and mushrooms. Have you heard of the Yule goat? Thor was said to have a chariot that was pulled across the sky by 2 goat bucks. During Yule, they would either bring gifts to the well-behaved children or demand gifts on behalf of Thor. Over time, Yule buck became Yulemut, who was a combination of Yule goat, Santa Claus, Father Christmas, would bring gifts and drive that sleigh and pulled reindeer, not goats. Just as the goat was associated with Thor, the boar was associated with Freyr. Pigs and wild boar were sacrificed to Freyr as a grant of a bountiful harvest, or to bless marriages and children. After the sacrifices were made during the Norse Yule, the meat was boiled and eaten at the feast. In the Middle Ages, the boar's head was considered the best part, and was served with the head of the table with the apple in its mouth. Today, vestiges of this tradition can be found in Christmas ham and the boar's head carol. Wassail translates into good health, as in, I drink to your good health. But it was also an alcohol punch made with spices and fruit juices that were used to make the toast. The word toast comes from the toasted bread served with the brew. If it also contained milk, eggs, or cream, it was called nog. To go to a wassailing was like a trick-or-treat for grown-ups. They would go from house to house and beg for wassail or other treats like figgy pudding. The tradition originated before Christianity as an orchard blessing ritual. The people believed that the fruit trees went into hibernation when the nights grew longer, so they would gather in the orchard after midwinter and make as much noise as they could to wake up the trees. Mistletoe was greatly revered by the ancient Druids, and the Norse people believed that it was magical. It stayed green all year round, even though the host tree would drop its leaves and look dead. It drew nutrients without any roots in the earth. It was always found high up in an oak or apple trees. If found in a sacred oak tree, it was cut down with a gold sickle during a special ceremony and caught in a white cloak before it hit the ground. Then the magical mistletoe was divided into a piece and was given to every home in the village to ward off evil for the next year. Thus, hanging the mistletoe over the door became a New Year's tradition. But there's another story. The Norse goddess of love was Frigga. Frigga had 2 sons, one of which was blind. The evil figure Loki made an arrow out of mistletoe wood and shot Frigga's blind son with a mistletoe arrow. The blind son died, and the goddess's tears became the mistletoe's white berries. When Frigga's blind son came back to life later, the Nordic goddess decided to turn mistletoes in Scandinavia into a symbol of love and fertility, requiring a kiss between humans meeting beneath the mistletoe. So there you have it. Just a brief glimpse into the story of Yuletide, and some of the traditions that we now know. And again, if you've been enjoying the content, please hit that like and subscribe button, and that little bell to be notified when any videos are coming up. Thank you for staying, thank you for listening, and join me as we continue next week on more of the legends and pagan holidays that make up Christmas. See you next time.